The year was 1865. The American Civil War, which had raged for 4 long years, was finally nearing its end. On a quiet April afternoon in a small Virginia village called Appomattox Courthouse, 2 men sat across from each other at a wooden table. One was Ulysses S. Grant, commander of the Union Army, wearing a simple and somewhat untidy uniform. The other was Robert Edward Lee, dressed in polished boots and a clean gray coat, his face lined with exhaustion yet calm and composed. In that room, the war that had torn a nation apart was about to close. With the stroke of a pen, Lee surrendered his army. Outside, thousands of soldiers stood in silence, watching history shift before their eyes. For many, Robert E. Lee became the very image of the South, its pride, its tragedy, and its contradictions. But to truly understand him, we must go back, long before the war, to the roots of his story. Robert Edward Lee was born on January 19, 1807, at Stratford Hall, a grand plantation in Virginia. He was born into one of the most prominent families in the state, a family with a legacy of revolution and honor. His father, Henry "Lighthorse" Harry Lee, had once been a celebrated cavalry hero of the American Revolution and a close ally of George Washington. Yet, when Robert was still a child, that legacy of glory collapsed. Henry Lee's financial troubles and debts ruined the family. His health failed, and by the time Robert was only 6 years old, his father was gone, leaving his mother, Anne Hill Carter Lee, to raise the children alone. From her, Robert learned discipline, faith, and the meaning of sacrifice. While other boys might have grown reckless without a father's hand, Robert grew reserved, controlled, and serious. He helped care for his mother when her health was poor, showing early signs of responsibility far beyond his age. These lessons of restraint and duty would follow him throughout his life. As a young man, Robert earned a place at the United States Military Academy at West Point. In 1825, he arrived at the fortress-like school on the banks of the Hudson River. Life there was harsh and exacting. Cadets woke early, marched constantly, studied mathematics, engineering, and artillery, and faced strict discipline for the slightest mistake. But Robert thrived. He graduated in 1829, second in his class of 46, and, remarkably, without a single demerit. His reputation was that of a quiet, diligent, and honorable cadet, respected by both teachers and peers. Engineering became his specialty. Lee joined the Army Corps of Engineers, where his first assignments were not glorious battles but the steady, careful work of building forts, surveying rivers, and strengthening America's defenses. It was a slow kind of soldiering, but it gave him skills that would later prove invaluable, an ability to see the battlefield as a map of possibilities, to measure distances, and to understand the lay of the land better than most. In 1831, Robert Lee married Mary Ann Custis, the great-granddaughter of Martha Washington. This marriage tied him not only to one of the first families of Virginia but also to the very legacy of the nation's founding. Together they would have 7 children, though Lee's military duties often kept him far from home. Through these years, Lee developed a reputation for character as much as for skill. He was known for his personal discipline, his religious faith, and his devotion to duty. He carried himself with dignity and rarely raised his voice. Yet behind the calm exterior lay contradictions. Though he once described slavery as a moral and political evil, he nonetheless inherited enslaved people through his wife's estate and continued to oversee their labor. Like his country, Lee was divided between ideals of liberty and the realities of bondage. By the 1840s, Robert E. Lee had established himself as a competent and respected officer. He had not yet commanded men in great battles, but his time was coming. America was heading toward new wars abroad and deeper divisions at home. For Robert Edward Lee, the lessons of duty, discipline, and sacrifice he had learned in his youth would soon be tested on a far larger stage. His story, already shaped by family honor, hardship, and the rigorous training of West Point, was about to enter a new chapter, one that would take him beyond engineering maps and fortifications into the smoke and fire of real battlefields. Robert E. Lee's youth was marked by discipline, sacrifice, and a burning desire to restore the honor that his father's legacy had complicated. Though born into the Virginia aristocracy, his family's fortunes had declined after his father's death. His mother, left to raise the children with limited resources, instilled in young Robert a deep sense of responsibility and an unwavering moral code. He was quiet, thoughtful, and reserved, yet his determination was unmistakable. In 1825, at the age of 18, Robert received an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. The academy was a place of strict rules, long hours of study, and relentless drilling. Many cadets struggled under the weight of its discipline, but Robert thrived. He treated the institution not as a burden but as an opportunity to prove his character. During his 4 years there, he never received a single demerit, a rare feat that set him apart. His professors and peers recognized his intellect, his meticulous attention to detail, and his natural sense of leadership. By the time he graduated in 1829, Lee stood second in his class. His specialty was engineering, a branch of the Army that demanded precision and intellect. This choice was fitting for a man who valued order and logic, yet behind his calm demeanor was a young officer eager to serve his country. That same year, tragedy struck his family once more. His mother died, never witnessing the full flowering of her son's promise. The loss hardened his resolve to live honorably in her memory. Robert's early assignments as an engineer took him to coastal fortifications and river projects, where his skill in designing defenses earned him the respect of senior officers. But life as a young soldier was not without personal milestones. In 1831, he married Mary Custis, the great-granddaughter of Martha Washington. Their union linked him directly to the legacy of America's first president, further deepening his sense of duty toward the nation. The marriage also brought new responsibilities. Mary suffered from chronic illness, and over the years, Robert took on the dual role of soldier and caretaker, balancing his career with his devotion to his wife and their 7 children. Those who knew him spoke of his gentleness at home and his discipline in the field. He was no ordinary officer, he was a man of both steel and tenderness, qualities that would later define his leadership. As the 1830s and 1840s progressed, Lee's reputation grew. His engineering projects demonstrated not only technical brilliance but also an ability to inspire the men under his command. Yet the true test of his military career came with the outbreak of the Mexican-American War in 1846. For the first time, Robert E. Lee would exchange the drafting table for the battlefield. In Mexico, his courage and tactical genius shone brightly. He served under General Winfield Scott, and his daring reconnaissance missions often placed him in grave danger. At Cerro Gordo, Contreras, and Chapultepec, Lee's keen eye for terrain and his fearless leadership played crucial roles in the American victories. Scott himself praised Lee as the very best soldier that I ever saw in the field. Such recognition was not given lightly. For Robert E. Lee, the war in Mexico was more than a proving ground, it was the crucible in which his legend began. He returned home a decorated officer, admired for his bravery and intellect. But even then, he remained humble, never boasting of his achievements. To him, service was not about personal glory but about honor, duty, and the quiet fulfillment of responsibility. The stage was set. Lee had risen from the son of a troubled legacy to one of the most respected officers in the United States Army. He had proven himself in both engineering and battle. Yet greater challenges, and greater turmoil, awaited him. The United States was inching toward division, and Robert E. Lee would soon find himself at the very heart of its greatest crisis. The years following the Mexican-American War brought Robert E. Lee increasing recognition and responsibility. He returned from the conflict with a reputation for brilliance, admired by fellow officers and respected even by his superiors. For many, he was not just a rising star in the U.S. Army, but a man destined for greatness. Yet as Lee's career flourished, the country he served was beginning to fracture. The mid-19th century was a time of growing tension in America. The expansion westward brought new questions. Would the territories carved out of the Mexican cession be free or slave states? Could the delicate balance between North and South survive? For Robert E. Lee, these questions were not abstract debates in Congress, they were issues that cut to the very heart of his identity as a Virginian, a husband, and a soldier sworn to protect the Union. In 1852, Lee accepted the position of superintendent at West Point, the very academy that had shaped his youth. There, he became a guiding figure for the next generation of soldiers. Among his cadets were men who would later serve under him in the Confederacy, and others who would fight against him in the Union Army. He treated them all with fairness, never revealing any hint of favoritism or prejudice. To Lee, the military was about honor and discipline, not politics. But the political storm outside West Point grew louder. In 1857, Lee inherited the estate of Arlington through his wife, Mary Custis Lee. This estate, overlooking the Potomac River, was not just land, it was deeply tied to the history of the Washington family. With it came not only prestige, but also responsibility, the management of enslaved laborers. Though Lee personally struggled with the morality of slavery, he felt bound by law and duty to uphold the terms of the estate's will. He expressed discomfort with the institution, writing that slavery was a moral and political evil, but he also believed it was something that only God could resolve in his own time. This contradiction reflected the complexities of his era, and the deep divisions of his country. As the 1850s unfolded, sectional conflict exploded into violence. Bleeding Kansas, the Dred Scott decision, and the rise of abolitionist voices made compromise harder and harder to achieve. Lee, like many Southerners who still loved the Union, felt torn between loyalty to the nation and loyalty to his state. In 1859, his sense of duty was tested directly. A radical abolitionist named John Brown launched a raid on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, hoping to ignite a slave rebellion. Lee, then a colonel in the U.S. Army, was ordered to put down the uprising. Leading a detachment of Marines, he swiftly captured Brown and restored order. The incident electrified the nation. To the south, John Brown was a dangerous fanatic. To many in the north, he was a martyr. For Robert E. Lee, the raid was not about politics, it was about maintaining law, order, and his sworn oath to the Army. By 1860, the country was on the brink of disaster. Abraham Lincoln's election to the presidency deepened Southern fears of losing their way of life. One by one, Southern states began to secede from the Union. As the nation cracked apart, all eyes turned to Robert E. Lee. Here was a man admired by both North and South, respected for his loyalty, honor, and ability. President Lincoln, along with General Winfield Scott, even considered Lee as the possible commander of the Union Army. For a brief moment, it seemed that Robert E. Lee might lead the forces that would preserve the United States. But destiny is rarely simple. Lee's heart belonged to Virginia, and Virginia's decision would soon force him to make the most difficult choice of his life. In April 1861, the storm finally broke. The bombardment of Fort Sumter in South Carolina ignited the Civil War, a conflict that would tear the United States apart. President Abraham Lincoln called for volunteers to suppress the rebellion, and the Union began to prepare for war. At that very moment, Robert E. Lee stood at a crossroads. His loyalty to the United States Army was unquestioned. For over 3 decades, he had served with honor, rising through the ranks and earning admiration from nearly every officer who knew him. General Winfield Scott, his longtime mentor, urged him to remain with the Union. Even President Lincoln's administration quietly reached out, offering him command of the entire Union Army. It was perhaps the greatest honor any soldier could receive. But Lee hesitated. His heart was divided between duty to his country and devotion to his home state of Virginia. To him, Virginia was not just a place on the map, it was his family, his history, and the soil of his ancestors. When Virginia voted to secede from the Union, Lee faced an impossible decision: to raise his sword against his native state, or to resign from the army he had served all his life. On April 20, 1861, with a heavy heart, Lee resigned his commission in the U.S. Army. In a letter, he wrote that he could not fight against Virginia, even though he wished no ill toward the Union. It was not a decision made in anger or ambition, but in sorrow and conviction. That very same week, he accepted command of Virginia's forces. For many in the North, this was a betrayal. How could a man so respected abandon the flag he had sworn to protect? But in the South, Lee was hailed as a patriot who had chosen loyalty to his people over personal gain. To him, the choice was not about slavery or politics, it was about defending his home, his family, and his sense of honor. The war that followed would thrust Robert E. Lee into the center of history. At first, he served in an advisory role, organizing defenses for the Confederacy. But by 1862, he was appointed commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. With that army, Lee would face overwhelming odds, outnumbered and outsupplied, yet time and again he would achieve victories that astonished the world. The nation was now divided, and so too was Robert E. Lee's legacy. To some, he was a traitor. To others, a hero. But to all, he was a man whose leadership and determination would define the course of the Civil War. And as the first battles erupted, it became clear that this would not be a short conflict. It would be a struggle of endurance, strategy, and willpower. For Lee, it was the ultimate test, not only of his military genius, but of the values he had carried since his youth: duty, honor, and sacrifice. The war had begun, and Robert E. Lee was now one of its central figures. The fate of a nation rested, in part, upon his shoulders. By the spring of 1862, Robert E. Lee had assumed command of the Army of Northern Virginia, a force that would soon become the backbone of the Confederate military effort. The responsibility was immense. His soldiers were fewer in number, less well supplied, and often inexperienced compared to the Union forces arrayed against them. Yet Lee brought to this challenge the same calm discipline and strategic brilliance that had defined his early career. Lee's leadership was defined by his ability to inspire. He knew his men personally, visited the camps, and shared their hardships. Soldiers respected him not just for his intellect, but for his presence on the battlefield. He did not ask anything of them that he would not do himself. This combination of courage, empathy, and tactical genius earned him their unwavering loyalty. The 7 Days Battles of 1862 marked Lee's first major campaign as commander. Facing Union General George B. McClellan, Lee conducted a series of daring maneuvers that forced the larger Union army to retreat from the gates of Richmond. His understanding of terrain, timing, and the psychology of his opponents turned a precarious position into a stunning defensive success. The Confederate press hailed Lee as a brilliant tactician, and his reputation began to grow beyond the South. Following this, Lee launched his first invasion of the North in September 1862, culminating in the Battle of Antietam. It was the bloodiest single day in American history, with over 22,000 casualties. Lee's army held firm against overwhelming odds, demonstrating not only his skill as a general but the resilience and dedication of his troops. Although the battle ended without a decisive victory, Lee's audacity and leadership earned him enduring admiration. In 1863, Lee faced his most famous challenge, the Battle of Gettysburg. Hoping to strike a decisive blow on Union soil, he led his army into Pennsylvania. For 3 days, his forces fought with determination and courage, yet the battle ultimately ended in a Confederate defeat. Gettysburg was a turning point, not only in the war but in Lee's career. It revealed the limits of even his exceptional command and foreshadowed the increasingly difficult road ahead. Despite setbacks, Lee continued to demonstrate remarkable strategic insight. He often anticipated enemy movements, used the landscape to his advantage, and managed to achieve victories even when outnumbered. His campaigns were studied by historians and military academies for decades to come, becoming lessons in leadership, maneuver warfare, and the human capacity for endurance under pressure. Yet Lee's brilliance on the battlefield was inseparable from his personal character. He was noted for his sense of honor, his refusal to engage in unnecessary cruelty, and his care for the lives of his men. He maintained discipline, but also allowed for compassion. Soldiers saw him as a father figure, a guide, and a man who embodied the values of duty and courage that had been instilled in him since childhood. By the height of the war, Robert E. Lee was no longer just a Virginian officer, he had become a symbol of the Confederate cause. His name was known across the nation, and his reputation as one of America's greatest generals was firmly established. But with fame came the weight of expectation, and the relentless pressure of war that would test every ounce of his resolve. The victories and losses of this period would define Lee not just as a military commander, but as a man confronted by the profound moral and human costs of conflict. The war was far from over, and the challenges that awaited him in the coming campaigns would push both his army and his spirit to the limit. By 1864, the tide of war had begun to shift decisively against the Confederacy. Union forces, now under the leadership of General Ulysses S. Grant, pressed relentlessly across multiple fronts. Lee faced the enormous challenge of defending Virginia, the heart of the Confederacy, with dwindling men and resources. The overland campaign was a brutal test of endurance. From the wilderness to Spotsylvania, Lee's forces engaged Grant in a series of fierce battles. Outnumbered and outgunned, Lee relied on his deep understanding of terrain, his tactical ingenuity, and the unwavering courage of his soldiers. Each engagement was a demonstration of Lee's brilliance. Even in retreat, he inflicted significant losses on the Union forces, delaying their advance and keeping the hope of the South alive. Lee's strategy became increasingly defensive. Supply lines were stretched thin, and his army faced constant shortages of food, ammunition, and medical care. Yet morale remained surprisingly high, a testament to Lee's leadership. He moved among his men, encouraged them, and inspired confidence even in the darkest hours. His presence alone often steadied units on the verge of collapse. In the winter of 1864 to 1865, the Confederacy's situation became desperate. Petersburg was under siege, cutting off vital supply routes to Richmond. Lee's army was trapped between the relentless Union forces and dwindling resources. Despite the grim circumstances, he continued to maneuver skillfully, attempting to outflank Grant and escape encirclement. In April 1865, the inevitable moment arrived. Richmond fell, and Lee's remaining forces were forced to retreat westward, hoping to link with other Confederate units. But the Union Army pursued relentlessly. On April 9, at Appomattox Courthouse, Lee faced the impossible, his army surrounded, exhausted, and starving. With a heavy heart, Lee surrendered to Grant. The act was not one of defeat in spirit, but of practicality and humanity. He sought to prevent further bloodshed and preserve the lives of his soldiers. Grant, recognizing Lee's dignity and honor, treated him with respect, allowing Confederate officers to retain their sidearms and soldiers to return home with their horses for spring planting. The surrender at Appomattox marked the effective end of the Civil War. Lee's decision had saved countless lives, yet it also marked the end of an era. He returned to a devastated Virginia, a state and a nation struggling to rebuild. His reputation as a military genius was secure, but the human and moral cost of the war weighed heavily on him. Lee's final campaigns were a testament to his leadership, strategic brilliance, and unwavering commitment to duty. Even in the face of overwhelming adversity, he remained a figure of respect and honor, guiding his men with courage and compassion to the very end. The surrender at Appomattox did not mark the end of Robert E. Lee's journey, only the beginning of a new chapter. The Civil War had left the South in ruins, cities burned, economies shattered, and countless families grieving. For Lee, this was a time of reflection, humility, and quiet resolve. Rather than retreating into obscurity or bitterness, Lee chose a path of service and reconciliation. In 1865, he accepted the presidency of Washington College in Lexington, Virginia, a small but respected institution. He was determined to dedicate his remaining years to education, believing that rebuilding the South required more than political agreements, it required the minds and hearts of the next generation. At Washington College, Lee transformed the institution. He restructured the curriculum, emphasizing moral character, discipline, and practical education alongside academics. He encouraged students to think critically, act honorably, and serve their communities. Though his health was not always robust, Lee walked the campus daily, offering guidance and encouragement. Students admired him, not just as a former general, but as a man of wisdom, integrity, and vision. Lee also became a symbol of reconciliation between the North and South. He publicly urged former Confederates to accept the outcome of the war, to respect the restored Union, and to work toward rebuilding the nation. While some criticized him for advising compliance with federal authority, his stance reflected a lifelong commitment to duty and honor, transcending political partisanship. During these years, Lee lived quietly with his wife, Mary, and their surviving children. He mourned those lost in the war, including soldiers he had commanded and friends on both sides of the conflict. Yet he never wavered in his belief that education, moral guidance, and reconciliation were the keys to a better future. Lee's impact extended far beyond the walls of Washington College. His leadership, humility, and dedication to principle became a model for others struggling to navigate the fractured post-war society. Visitors from across the country came to see him, seeking wisdom from the man whose decisions had shaped the fate of a nation. Though he had once commanded armies and faced the horrors of battle, Lee's final years were marked by calm reflection, mentorship, and the quiet shaping of future leaders. His life after war demonstrated that true leadership was not only about victories on the battlefield, but about guiding others with integrity, vision, and compassion. Robert E. Lee passed away on October 12, 1870, at the age of 63. He left behind a legacy complex and profound, a man admired for his military genius, respected for his character, and remembered as a figure who bridged the chasm between war and peace. His story, from the plantation at Stratford Hall to the classrooms of Washington College, remains a testament to duty, honor, and the enduring human capacity to rebuild after tragedy. Robert E. Lee's life was a tapestry of contrasts, honor and controversy, brilliance and restraint, devotion and heartbreak. To understand his legacy is to understand the complexities of America itself, a nation struggling with freedom, loyalty, and morality. Lee's military career remains one of the most studied in history. His campaigns during the Civil War are still analyzed in military academies around the world, admired for strategic ingenuity, understanding of terrain, and ability to inspire men against overwhelming odds. Battles like Antietam, Chancellorsville, and Gettysburg showcase a commander who could think several moves ahead, yet always remembered the human cost of each decision. Yet Lee was more than a general. He embodied a code of personal conduct rarely seen on such a scale. He valued integrity above all, led by example, and balanced firmness with compassion. He refused to engage in needless cruelty, treated his men with respect, and accepted defeat with dignity. These qualities earned him admiration from soldiers on both sides of the conflict and a complicated place in the hearts of historians and the public. His post-war years further shaped his legacy. At Washington College, Lee molded young minds, emphasizing discipline, moral responsibility, and service. He became a symbol of reconciliation, urging a war-torn nation to heal, to rebuild, and to educate the next generation. His life after the battlefield demonstrated that leadership is not confined to victories and conquests, but extends to shaping societies, values, and futures. Lee's personal contradictions, his moral opposition to slavery alongside his role as a slaveholder, his devotion to the Union versus loyalty to Virginia, mirror the struggles of a nation coming to terms with its own ideals. He has been praised, criticized, revered, and questioned, yet few can deny the profound influence he had on American history. Even decades after his death in 1870, Robert E. Lee's presence lingers in American memory. Monuments, schools, and historical sites bear his name, reminding generations of both his achievements and the complex era he represented. Scholars continue to debate his decisions, ethics, and impact, yet his story remains an essential chapter in understanding the Civil War and the nation it nearly destroyed. Ultimately, Robert E. Lee's life was defined by choices made in the shadow of impossible circumstances. He navigated honor, duty, and conscience with a steadfast commitment to his principles. His legacy is not simple, nor is it uniform, but it is enduring. Through triumph and tragedy, in war and in peace, Robert E. Lee remains a figure who challenges us to reflect on courage, morality, and the cost of loyalty. The story of Robert Edward Lee is, in many ways, the story of America itself, brilliant and flawed, torn by conflict yet striving for unity, bound by duty, and forever seeking the delicate balance between principle and reality.